Okay, go ahead and get started with this. It's been a while since I've done a call or podcast newsletter on a certain topic, so thought I'd try to get back in the swing of things and do a couple different things that always get kind of brought up. Um, One of the things I guess with this is with PPE, right? So this episode we're talking about PPE. Um, what is PPE? And of course, the importance of not bending safety rules when there might be some pressure from other factors, other sources, other people, whatever it might be, that kind of comes up. And this is important, from a supervisor manager level, not necessarily just an HSE professional level, but a supervisor, manager, employee, even at home, right? To go around the safety rules. So I got some notes here wrote on that. And then gloves, some talking points on gloves. One of the biggest PPE that we can actually, don is gloves for hand protection. Up there with eye protection, right? You lose an eye or you lose a hand or a finger, you get a drastic cut. It can definitely hurt your quality of life, in a big way. Different factors. You either affects your livelihood with work if you work with your hands, and then anything that you may do outside of work that you may have a passion for. So I'll try to keep this pretty straightforward on topic, much as I can. If you got any other questions, we'll wait until maybe after the meeting or after the call here, or you can put stuff in the Q&A box. So what is PPE? So of course, when we think about PPE, what do we think about? We think about, hard hats, right? I mean, there's all sorts of different types of PPE. You got hard hats, you have um hearing protection, right? It kind of gets overlooked a lot. Of hearing protection, you got different types of hearing protection with ear muffs, ear plugs. You get hand protection. So of course, with hand protection, you have gloves. You have chemical handling gloves. You can get into detail with a lot of these aspects when it comes to PPE, right? Eye protection, you got goggles, you got safety glasses, you got prescription safety glasses, you got face shields. So of course PPE is important, right? And of course it refers to, your protective clothing that you wear, right? I always think about PPE as everything that you may put on your body that you do work and you will go to work in, right? FR gear, what type of clothing are you wearing when you're working on different projects, right? So not only is it helmets like weld helmets and goggles, but it's your garments. You don't want loose fitting clothing working around rotating pieces of equipment, right? It's a hazard. Maybe you didn't wear the proper PPE or the clothing for that day. It's definitely designed to be on the wearer's body or the person's body, and it can be specific per task or it can be general, right? Fall protections is something that's pretty specific. If you face a fall hazard, you need to wear a full body harness and preferably a shock absorbing lanyard. Even ladders, you think about ladders, that's a tool, but it's also a form of somewhat of a PPE because it's helping you access something in a safer manner than it would be to climb up on something. So I try not to look at this too much in a box, but kind of outside the box a little bit too. The purpose of PPE is obviously to minimize the exposure. So we know there's a known exposure or a hazard. The PPE is to minimize that hazard, that could cause, definitely a serious workplace injury or illness. We can get into illnesses if you wanted to as well with this, but we're thinking about actually, injuries and the acute effects if you would have something to go wrong. But long-term effects, you have respirators, another form of PPE for breathing in kind of contaminants, and of course that could have acute effects or chronic effects depending on what you're handling. So and that kind of can branch you down the line of hazard communication and knowing what you're dealing with and reading labels and SDSs. So all this kind of correlates. PPE is always our last line of defense when it comes to protecting the worker our employees and yourself. The hierarchy of controls definitely sets that up as being the bottom, right? You try to substitute engineer out the hazard. If you can't do that, you need to work on some type of administrative controls. And the last line of defense is always your PPE, right? There's some other things that can go kind of in between that scale, but that's how it really works out. We try to design it out. All right, can we guard that hazard? Can we eliminate that? Do we have to work with that chemical, or can we substitute it with a safer chemical? And that would dictate the PPE that you may have to wear because the hazard's still present. So you're thinking about potential hazards and you're thinking about, known hazards as well. Potential hazards could be, unforeseen pinch points, sharp edges, right? If you're working with things that are being fabricated, laser cut, maybe something missed deburring in the deburring process from a quality standpoint, you could suffer a cut on your hand, right? So we always got to be wearing our PPE whenever we're working in the manufacturing, construction, and the field environments. So the importance of having a diverse range of PPE. I'm a big advocate of, if someone's not wearing their PPE, why aren't they wearing their PPE? Ask the question, what's the problem with the current PPE, or just, having that dialogue, that conversation with the employee to see if there may be something with the PPE that's not suited for them. So having a diverse range of PPE that covers not only a wide range of hazards, but also just a wide range of maybe fits and feels, right? Gloves are a great example. I know we talk about gloves all the time, and especially in this industry, food manufacturing, machining industry. Um, but it's important, right? You could have glove, cut hazards, and then you may have impact hazards. Those gloves face different things. You may have, biological cleanliness, sanitation issues when you think about tech centers or being in food grade plants that you have to worry about more than you do maybe the actual cut hazard of your hands. You're welding. You're not really. I don't recommend welding with cut resistant gloves because if something's hot and molten hot, those gloves will melt to you. Of course, your welding gloves will be more resistant to that. A comprehensive, tailored to the protection. Got to be comprehensive to the safety of the environment, right? And then of course, tailored or protection, right? Specific to the user. If we can be, different sizes of gloves, you can't just say, hey, all we have is large cut gloves. That's all you have to work with, and you have somebody with really small hands or really big hands, right? Same way with your footwear. You want to have a good selection of footwear choices for the end user because comfort, especially when it comes to your footwear, is first and foremost closely behind the actual safety of the footwear, of the, steel toed or safety toed, whether it's composite, right? But definitely having that tailored, um, kind of diverse PPE range for sure. Um, Again, and last thing on my notes here is employee comfort. So, like I said, providing a wide range of PPE that can improve comfort and wearability, definitely encourages consistent use among your employees, right? If it's comfortable and it's easy to wear, you're going to be more apt to wear it. Safety glasses, the same way. If they're hurting your temples, your hard hat won't stay on, it doesn't fit well, right? They're not going to wear it, right? If it feels good, even if it looks good, right? Looks have not really always been a thing, but if it looks cool, people might be more apt to wear it, especially in the younger generation, right? Sometimes it's how you might be able to pitch doing some of these things. So just trying to be in a little bit, like I said, comprehensive, diverse, thinking about it. Obviously, doing a PPE hazard assessment to figure out what your hazards are in your work environment. Doing JHAs, risk assessments will help get you from a tailored protection standpoint what you might need for that work environment or that work task. So I'm gonna roll this in the gloves first is some talking points on gloves. I know it's gloves, always a big topic, right? And we know the importance of gloves. I know obviously we handle all sorts of different materials. Not only are we thinking about, from a cut protection, but, chemical absorption's always there, right? Solvents, acids, caustics, things that we could touch throughout the day, even from a germ perspective, temperature extremes, right? You damage your hands, it's definitely going to affect your life, your quality of life, right? So I always kind of sometimes when I think about, especially with temperature extremes, I think about, when you're a kid or you're learning about fire safety, and the 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 firefighter comes into your school and talks to you about, knowing that there may be a fire on the other side of the door. You don't touch it with the palm of your hand, you touch it with the back of your hand, because if you hurt the back of your hand, you can still use your palm to crawl, to grab, etc. So again, your hands are very important. Just kind of makes you think about that. Um, there's definitely different types, and they're always specific to the end user and to the hazard, right? Chemical resistant gloves used for handling chemicals and solvents, right? The materials that are typically used with your chemical resistant gloves are nitrile and neoprene, PVC potentially. You got your cut resistant gloves, which we uh, deal with at JBT quite often. Some stainless steel mesh, high performance polyurethane. Typically, what you use is standard cut resistant gloves, not so much Kevlar anymore, but definitely protect you against, punctures, sharp objects, some impact as well. There's been many cases of a bad cut, or maybe, excuse me, a bad pinch where the user was wearing gloves, still sustained an injury, but the injury definitely would have been a lot more severe if the gloves weren't worn by the user. So, um, very important. Hopefully, people wear gloves at home. I know I'm an advocate of that, depending on what I'm doing. I think safety glasses are more of a common thing to wear more at home now, and maybe your safety-toed shoes when you mow. But make sure if you're cutting brush, you're doing any kind of yard work, handling tools, just working with your hands, even with concrete work. Um, Before my safety gig, yeah, I did a lot of concrete work. That concrete definitely does a number on your skin and your hands, and having gloves when you're doing this type of stuff, even at home, will save you a lot of pain in the future. Thermal gloves, I know we don't get too much into thermal gloves, but that's something that is out there. Also, disposable gloves, we do handle a little bit, but not so much. I do like disposable gloves for certain applications from a dexterity standpoint. I know there's some gloves that we have got here recently that I wouldn't say they're disposable gloves, but they're gloves that are cut resistant, but they are tearaway gloves. They're pretty neat. I wouldn't say we're trialing them, but we're using them to see how they hold up. But you can wear them around rotating pieces of equipment, depending on some of the specifications on the equipment that you're working around, right? So Ansel makes these gloves, and you can tell they're lighter in some areas. I should have brought some in for this video and showed you, but maybe that's something we can do, maybe a short form video on. But if you would get, an entanglement or a catch on a keyway or something, maybe on a drill press, it will tear the glove off you. It won't wrap your hand up in it. I still don't think they're recommended for high speed lathes, anything that's real high speed, high RPM, because you could take a chance of getting jerked in there and your arm still getting wrapped around there. But lower RPM stuff, I don't know quite the specifications on that off the top of my head. Um, but we are trialing that, so they do have some of that. Your electrical insulated gloves is the next thing. Those are highly important. A lot of regulatory requirements around that when it comes to NFPA 70E on your electrical gloves, of them being tested annually, um, for any kind of punctures and cuts. Right, you can have a rotation. Typically, I like to buy two different pairs, two different colors. So every 6 months, you kind of rotate them out. You send out one off to go get tested, and you have another that are tested and stamped, and you wear them. They usually come with leather protectors, so you don't get a cut or a puncture while you're working with something. And again, that's usually qualified for anything that's live electrical, anything over 50 volts. That's deemed, um, you know, high electrical in that standpoint. How to select the right gloves for the job. So obviously, like to do risk assessments. We do risk assessments a lot. Either it's PPE glove specific risk assessments, or it could be hazard analysis or other risk assessments throughout, a job or an install. So you do an assessment and you have just generally you have some cut risks, some material handling risks. Most generally your leather cut resistant gloves will handle all those, but you have something where it's maybe a one-off or some unique situations where you do your risk assessment on, you have to do some handling of chemicals or maybe some live electrical work. That's what other gloves will come into play to help, protect you for sure. The significance of proper fit and comfort. So gloves, some gloves, what I usually look to find out is you kind of pay for comfort, right? So the more the glove typically costs generally, the better it's going to feel and probably hold up longer, right? You get what you pay for kind of deal when it comes to gloves and PPE in general. But you want to make sure that you have a good snug fit that's not too tight or not too loose, right? But they fit well and they're little just I like my gloves just a little snug, right, from a dexterity standpoint, but it's still having that adequate protection where it's not, busting through and I can still, make a fist. That's good. Comfort's always important, right? If they're uncomfortable, you're not going to wear them. I got some gloves at home that I've used from like snow removal and things that just are painful to wear and I just don't wear them. I've bought some other things that I like better, but again, that's kind of trial and error. You may not know that they don't fit well for your hand or your hand structure, and you may have to get something else. And again, if they're too tight, too bulky, don't fit right, they're not comfortable, you could get some muscle fatigue, hand fatigue, joint fatigue involved with that. Sizing, always try to size your hand before you get the gloves. I know Fastenal does a good job with our vending machine solutions and their vending machine solutions of providing you with kind of a hand chart or hand sizing guide. You can put your hand on, figure out what size glove you need so you make a good educated choice instead of kind of wasting inventory a little bit. So, tips for maintaining and inspecting and ensuring gloves offer the maximum protection, right? Regular inspect your PPE. All PPE should be regularly inspected, right? I've had people ask questions before. It's like, hey, is this PPE expired? Not, it's not always that simple. I know OSHA used to, or a lot of manufacturers and OSHA used to go off of some rules of, hey, there's an expiration date on this PPE. Not so much anymore because for my PPE, is probably less used than somebody else's PPE. Therefore, if I inspect it and I don't find anything that's structurally integrally wrong with it, I can keep wearing that for years on end, right? Body harnesses is one of the things that comes to mind that was a kind of a 10-year lifespan. Well, a harness that I have for 10 years, probably still fairly new. Maybe I've worn it a handful of times a year compared to somebody that may be, loading grain at a rail car and he's tying off every day. That heck, it might only last a year, right? Just depends on your regular inspection inventory, and then obviously you have some compliance issues with that too. Some of the stuff from a compliance standpoint needs to be checked, monthly, quarterly, annually, right? So fall protection equipment is typically a quarterly check. A lot of things can be annual. Um, your use of something um, is increased. Again, always inspect before use, just like, lifting devices. It's a documented inspection annually, but the user should be inspecting that piece of equipment and those straps daily. Um, we can be more stringent than that if we wanted to be, but that's just the legal rule on that aspect. So, if it's dirty, clean it. Typically, you can clean all your PPE with mild. I wouldn't say degreasers, but some mild detergent, soap and water, warm soap and water, hand wash. You're good to go. Some of it's cheap enough where it's dirty or it's scratched or it's damaged. You can throw it away, get you a new pair, right? That's important too, especially with safety-toed shoes. And if you got, your allowance, if your shoes prematurely wear out, depending on where you buy that, you have some warranty involved. If not, we will reimburse you or give your allowance back if they've been worn out through work. Same way with your prescription eyeglasses, right? If you damaged, scratched, cracked through work, we'll replace them, right? If your eyes change, I know that happens to people as they age. Your eyes can change, from being maybe 20/20 to, worse. Develop astigmatism, whatever it is, you need glasses, and we want new prescription safety glasses. That's fine. If you're gonna wear them, we'll pay for it. Your employees' safety is up first, the most important thing, and it's comparatively speaking, um, the best route to go. So with that said, I'm going to get into a topic, and the reason why I brought this up, the pressure of bending safety rules. Of course, we've all been in situations where we've had people, come in and try to pressure. I've been pressured before to make some decisions. Is it okay to do this? We need an answer on this quickly, right? And of course, I kind of look at myself as being a um, pretty common sense approach when it comes to EHS and EHS professional, right? There's some things that you definitely can't cross over because there's regulatory requirements, but there's some things that you can implement to help maintain safety, plus obviously get the job done. But one thing to know is never put profit or production ahead of safety, right? We're not in a situation where we deem that we have to put somebody's health at risk, life at risk to be able to turn a dime. That's definitely not what we do. And I know that's not the message that gets advocated, but within this profession, I know talking to my counterparts in other industries, it's something that always comes up, or at least if faces a scenario. Well, so and so is not certified to operate that crane, but it's only for a couple lifts. Is it okay for him to do it? Those kind of questions like that kind of can come up, and they do come up. And it's like, okay, if you say yes, something happens, bad things are going to happen, right? Even if he was trained, something happens, bad things are going to happen. But at least he was trained, he was knowledgeable, he knew how to run the crane, right? Is the employee comfortable with doing something like that? Probably not, right? And us as leaders, as managers, supervisors, or even just neutral employees, to be a safety leader is being able to stop work and say, hey, this isn't right. It's not ethical. We're not moving forward. Let's get the proper training, get the proper personnel in here, the proper tool, whatever it might be to perform the job safely. We're not approving this. So, I mean, those situations do arise, and how do you handle those situations? Really, it's a case by case situation most generally. With stopping work, figuring out what the issue is, what we currently have as solutions, and finding a resolution, the safe resolution in between there. Fortunately, doesn't happen a lot, but it can. It could be small things, right? I mean, it could be just, the crane one's probably a common one. Maybe it's a ladder situation where it's like, hey, we don't have a ladder or a platform for this area. Can we just climb up on that, conveyor and get to that, you know, valve to be able to be changed out? That's happened before in my past, right? So it's like, well, I don't feel like locking out that machine because the machine's right here, and it just seems like it's a waste of time, things like that, that even through your own consciousness, that's not a right thing. So understanding the risks first, health and safety, with it. Obviously, we've talked a little bit about that, but you can have, something goes wrong. You have definitely some long-term health impacts for that if something would go wrong. Of course, legal and financial risks as well if something would go wrong from lawsuits or legal consequences with employees involved in the company. Um, you know, there's always some scenarios. I like to try to point out some additional scenarios where that can happen, right? Time constraints. There's always peer pressure. There's management pressure. There's complacency. That's probably the biggest thing, is complacency. Maybe you don't even know you're bending a rule or you're taking a shortcut, but with the complacency, you kind of are, right? Forklift and seat belts, big complacency thing. Why don't you wear your feet, your seatbelt on a forklift, but every time you get in your car, you do put it on? Well, because in a car you got the implement, the consequence of a ticket. There's more documented, car crash fatalities relating to non-compliance seatbelt use, right? Our kids see us in those habits, right? But those habits hopefully transfer over into our work habits as well. And a forklift is just as dangerous or even more dangerous than a motor vehicle, right? It could be 3 times, 4 times heavier than your standard vehicle, just because of the lifting capacity. Um, Fall protection issues, I've came across that many times, from the agribusiness that I worked for, corn mills and soybean plants and loading trucks and rail cars and finding adequate tie-off points and adequate, fall protection systems. Never been any rules on that just because of the consequences could be so dire. But any consequence, anything that could happen, a worst case scenario would likely happen once that stuff like that maybe gets made up in your mind. So, um, obviously, consequence for not adhering safety rules, right? There's always accidents, injuries. That's probably the most and foremost consequence of not adhering safety rules or bending anything. Of course, there's legal ramifications, like I've noted, and then of course there's some financial impact. First and foremost is accidents, injuries. Um, Cutting corners lead to definitely physical harm of yourself and or other employees. Long-term health effects could related to repeated exposure to the unsafe condition, right? Maybe we know there's an unsafe condition, but someone doesn't want to speak up, right? That could have a long-term effect, whether it might be a health effect, not necessarily, but maybe it's, just that ticking time bomb of something that could eventually happen. That's what we want to know about. So, I mean, strategies for resisting pressure and maintaining safety protocols. There's no real big strategy. The thing is, I would say, is just this education, training, experience, trust in your gut, right? Leading with safety. I always say, when there's something that gets brought up and people want to point at, well, this isn't in the regulation. I always say, well, it's not about what is in OSHA or in some kind of regulatory textbook. It really comes down to what's the right thing to do, right? What's the message we're sending? What's the right thing to do? I always try to look at, what kind of message is this sending to somebody, not only as the company, but me personally, if I make this decision, right? So I take, at least how I look at it, I take a lot of safety issues, right or wrong and indifferent, sometimes too personal, when something goes wrong. And I look at what I can do and do some self-reflection on what I can do better. I think we all need to do that a little bit, maybe not so seriously, but always think of, okay, yeah, the regulation doesn't say that, but we do have a hazard. We have an exposure. We put employees at risk. We are doing this, but we can do this. We can go above and beyond. We can protect them a little bit better and still get the job done. So just take a little bit more time to do the job or get the right tool, and it will be, better for our safety culture in the future, right? We set the expectation. Once you bend a rule, or once you give somebody an inch to take a mile, once you set that precedent and that expectation, in my experience, that's how it's always going to be, and it's hard to get that back. So, boundaries are important. Um, believe in what you say, and of course, backing up with what you say with education and training, and a lot of education. When I say that, isn't maybe formal education, but it's just work experience, knowledge, benchmarking, talking to other people, not necessarily in EH&S, but just other managers and other leaders, to really understand, um, everything as a whole. So, empowerment too, maybe less on yourself as managers and more on an employee basis is, of course, empower our employees to speak up. I think we do that really well. I don't think there's a fear of retaliation. And there may be some other peer pressure. It's peer on peer potentially. I don't know. Um, I mean, I do know. I mean, that is a factor. I mean, that happens. It happens everywhere. Not only just in manufacturing, maybe even JBT, but just everywhere. Generally, it's just how human nature is. There's always peer to peer pressure. But you know, obviously recognizing employees for bringing up issues and rewarding, not necessarily rewarding them, but at least some recognition when things get brought up. And of course, providing clear channels for reporting safety concerns. I think we've done a better job at that. I think process map has helped that. I think leadership's commitment that's changed has definitely gave us better avenues to report things, being available more often than not, and understanding where safety stands when things get brought up and how seriously we take it. Again, it goes back to, once we set that precedent, that's how it's going to be. And if we take that person's um, you know, issue seriously and you follow up and you provide feedback, right, it's going to just grow that culture even more. Leadership commitment, and other support systems too, right? Ensure management leads by example and adhere to the safety protocols, right? We have a glove on our persons policy, we have PPE policies, right? This is probably a common one that gets brought up a lot. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this is one of the rules that always gets asked is, well, why do we need safety toed shoes on the manufacturing floor where we got walkway lines? Or why can't I step over this walkway line to go to shipping and receiving? There's nothing going on there. It's like, well, if you bend that rule, if you hold that precedent, let's say somebody else, you're going to it's going to keep pushing, going to keep pushing, it's going to keep pushing. It's a boundary. Nope, it's black and white. This is the precedent. This is the safety protocols. This is where we're standing. It's a yes or no. And a hard part about leadership, especially safety leadership, is you don't make a whole lot of friends when you do that, but you have to, right? You got to say no. You got to say yes. You got to be firm on your answers, right? And of course, leadership as a whole has to be the same way and have to back you up on your decisions. They can't be rash decisions. They can't be emotional decisions. They can be backed up with some type of fact, typically, right? So there's a hazard there. There's typically hazards there. There could be a hazard there, a potential hazard there. That's why we want you to wear this PPE. It's for your own good and your safety, right? Sorry, the inconvenience is you may have to change shoes, but hey, it is what it is. Sorry, you may have to put gloves on, but if you cut your hand and you cut through your tendons and you can no longer use three of your fingers, you're going to be worse off in the long run, right? So, strictly enforce, safety rules is kind of what I'm getting to here, really, with consistent consequences for violations. So being consistent to be done a better job, right? So there's always that positive or that safety approach or that progressive safety discipline that I always go at, and I look at things, and of course HR usually gets involved with this, but I always look at, was it deliberate or was it intentional, right? What is the message that's being broadcasted, with that action? Was it deliberate? Did he know the rule and just decided to ignore it and go ahead? Or did he not know the rule, right? So it's kind of what I look at when it comes down to some of that safety discipline and where it may lead to, and what kind of message are you sending? Are you going to write the guy up, and is it going to send a positive message or is it going to send a negative message? Sometimes enforcing with a harder fist sends a better message than one that's maybe a little bit more soft. Fortunately, I can say I'm not really involved with too many safety discipline issues because most generally safety culture is pretty good. But there's been some questions on some things in the past that I've had to give some guidance on, and of course make some decisions on the spot, and of course with your best judgment, experience, and knowledge, make the right call for sure. So with that, I'm gonna wrap it up with this. Is just some conclusions for this. Of course, reinforce that we want a collective responsibility when it comes to anything when it regards to safety, whether it's PPE, whether it's um, any safety rules, and abide by them. Right? We prioritize safety over any kind of profit or production, right? We work with people, we work with customers, we work with vendors, we work with a lot of different people. I've went out of my way to help, colleagues and customers and things with their safety programs or suggestions on improvements, things like that. So always collaborate is important. And I think this business does a pretty good job with too, not only from a food standpoint, but from other aspects within business. Um, and then of course safety protocols we have in place is there to protect everyone's well-being, not only just maybe the company's integrity, but your well-being, right? We want everybody to go home in the same condition that they arrived, hopefully better, right? I don't want somebody to go home in a worse condition, obviously, maybe physically, but mentally as well, right? Just make sure that that is happening day in and day out. um, and back with the PPE thing again, just make sure that we're doing the right things. And of course, if there is safety issues or concerns, that we bring them up through the avenues that we have, whether it's process map. Again, that avenue should be more of a direct line to your manager, supervisor if there's a safety concern, and then followed up with a process map, idea gen, near miss, incident report, right? With the near miss incident report, you can tie action items on, which we've talked about before, and you can assign owners, and you have a better check, do, act, follow up loop. When you get it into that type of system, it doesn't go away. So that's a good thing about that. So with that, I don't know if there's any questions. I know we had somebody that had a drop. I think Eric had a drop. But if you have any other questions later on after this, once I send this out, too, if you have follow-up questions later, or clarifications or comments, just reach out to me directly. And with that, I'll give everybody some your day back, and have a good rest of your day. Thanks.